Welcome back to Dreamloop DeVlogs. We're here again with Ville and Matias. And
I'm Ville,
as usual. Everybody knows about the loot box fiasco.
That was one of the things we were supposed to talk about last week. That's one of the things we want to do here is kind of talk about because this whole thing, why are we doing these things? That in itself is a good question. And one of the answers is that we figure that because we talk about these things a lot and the sort of game developer perspective on these things is not often something that is accessible to people for various reasons. We are not under any NDA stuff like that in that regard, so we figured we might as well talk about it. Of course, we are just one group of dudes, and it's not like we are a big deal or anything, but
but we talk about these things all the time.
Yeah. And we figured it might be interesting to somebody how we view things, because on some regards, because of our profession, we might have different opinions. But yeah, Lootcrates, lovely topic that
everybody loves Lootcrates. I have maybe my opinion on the whole Loot Crate, the culture and how it works. It might be a little maybe too negative for no reason, because I consider myself a bit of a old school flavored gamer. Maybe I like games where things aren't marketed to you that heavily. And Loot Crates, not all games have a very aggressive Loot Crates system. And for example, Quake Champions, those Loot Crates don't even have any items that give you any stats. They're only cosmetics. So I'm really fine with that. But then again, when it comes to games where Battlefront 2, I understand that people are pretty mad about how the whole thing works.
I think it's of course there's many reasons. It's such a broad topic really, because one topic was already touched. One thing that's often mentioned is the whole thing whether loot crates, whether the items in there are cosmetic or not, and the whole thing about it. It's quite obvious that if they are not only cosmetic, then it becomes basically, I guess everybody agrees that it at least becomes more controversial.
Yeah.
If there's non-cosmetic things in Loot Crates. And people seem to think that, for example, Overwatch's model is pretty fair. My personal opinion that it's pretty fair. As a developer, I think if that stuff fits the game, my personal approach to this is kind of to jump to the point, is that selling cosmetics in general, people it's a weird topic, because I know for a fact there are completionists. There are people who are to them it's I have to have all the cosmetics, and then it becomes tricky. But that's something that maybe I would put on the person, that's their problem and not the game's problem.
Yeah.
And outside of that, having loot crates in there, the way I view it is the way I purchase cosmetics in games sometimes, preferably outside of loot crates, but because cosmetics is that it's support for the game. It allows me to support the dev, and at the same time I get a cool thing. I don't need to have it, but there's the option, and then I can purchase it.
Yeah.
And from a dev point of view, I would love to be able to have something like that going on, in the sense that doing stuff if people purchase a certain amount of cosmetics or whatever, then that money allows us to, for example, push out the free DLC, stuff like that. This is something that I think a lot of games are sort of trying, this games as service model, which can be really evil, but I think there is potential for a really good system there.
Do you play any games that actually have loot crates?
That's actually funny, in the sense that is currently being discussed. I don't, because I don't like that particular model. Well, I guess you could argue that Destiny 2 does, but whether I play Destiny 2, because I played for 2 weeks. Yeah, well, I played for 2 weeks and now I feel like I'm done. That's a whole another topic. But that sort of has it. But outside of that, not really. Every game has some aspect. You can get a random cosmetics from somewhere or whatever. But
yeah. So are the stuff you get in loot crates in Destiny 2, are they do they give you advantages?
It's weird, because that's another interesting thing, is because it's a loot-based game. It's in a sense it's like Diablo, in any game where you can open a treasure chest and you get random loot, you could say that's a loot crate. In Destiny you get these engrams that have random items in them, but you cannot, the ones that give you stuff that's actually usable, that has actual gun, stuff like that, with actual good stats. Those cannot be purchased. You can only purchase stuff that basically gives you cosmetics. But it's weird because basically all the progression. I mean, it has like a lot of loot creative problems to the game because all the items you get come from this. You basically buy a box and then you get random stuff. That's essentially what it is, and it's not a very nice system necessarily. But that's like I guess the hip thing to do in games now.
Yeah, it certainly tugs on a certain reward mechanic in your brain, and you know I can definitely see that a lot of games and a lot of developers are going that direction, and it has a lot to do, I think personally, with the fact that games are now meant for a lot larger audience than they used to be, like 15 years ago or something like that.
And I think it's also like the whole games as service thing because it's a business. And then of course that's another thing where people often talk about like games are more expensive to make these days, so they have to do this shit stuff like that. That turns out to be usually proven wrong time and time again. Like the making of the actual game doesn't necessarily need to be ridiculously expensive. It can be depending on what you're making, but it doesn't have to be. But it's more about that this is a business and businesses exist to make as much money as possible.
Yeah, and if you take into consideration like when you're asking how much does making a game cost, if you count all the like the cinematics, like for example in like Final Fantasy 14, it has really good looking cinematics. But do you count the cost of making those cutscenes into the whole budget of?
I mean, usually that is, and similarly, if you make like television, advertisement stuff like that, that's also it's marketing, so it's budgeting.
Well, also the point is that you wouldn't have to maybe put that much effort and money into making an awesome cinematic. I like awesome cinematics, of course, but you should also focus a lot of effort on the game core itself, and maybe making the game wouldn't be that expensive if you diverted some money into
that. And
core.
I mean, it's a decision to make it expensive, and regardless, like even if you do decide to make it expensive, which is on you, even outside of that, it's been proven time and time again that companies don't need to resort to these tactics to survive. Like that's another thing that ties into some stuff that we may have discussed in the show previously, where our personal philosophy, so far at least, is that we want to make enough money so that everybody gets a nice salary, and we don't that much worry about anything past that. But companies, by definition, usually are built to worry about past that, Like so, it's like you can. I mean, I'm pretty sure they could not have loot crates, they could not have microtransactions, but it's pretty much a known fact that they would make less money. And shareholders would be upset, stuff like that. So that's I think is the core of the thing really, is that it's just if you treat video games as business, if the company you're purchasing a game from is essentially a game that's it's a company that they are primarily focused on making money, then they're gonna pull all this stuff. That's what, because they want money. They want your money.
Of course, it's a business, and DLCs are also like very visibly now a thing that every like game dev does, because like I still remember quite vividly in the past when they weren't called DLCs. They were just expansion discs or stuff like that. And I have to say that this is also, again, my personal opinion, that I feel like more often in those times the expansion discs felt more substantial than DLCs. They weren't so many cash grab types.
But of course, that's also sort of a little bit ties into the whole that back then they had to be on disc. Now you don't have to do it on disc. Like that's other like, of course we keep branching, but that's another conversation, is like what is substantial, what isn't. Because I think there's the same thing, that it's completely fine for a company to do say what and it's gonna be maybe slightly controversial, but say what Borderlands 2 did. Borderlands 2 had a fuck ton of their cosmetics. They didn't have loot crates back then, they were DLC. They had so many DLC that basically just gave you church of skins that were like, €1, €2, whatever. And that in itself is, I think, completely fine. If you use that to then, people buy those, and then you put that money into developing more content. So essentially the logic is we need money so that we can add stuff to the game. So I think one of the best ways to get that money is to sort of make it obligatory. Does obligatory mean that you don't have to do it? I always get that mixed up.
Obligatory means like you have to do something.
Yeah, that's what I figured. What's the word for it? Well, you don't, it's not obligatory, you don't have to do it. But if you are cool and you want to support the company, then you give them money, in return they give you cosmetic stuff, and also on top of that, the money you gave them is going to be used to make content in the future. And I think that's the bit that the industry is missing right now, is like that assurance. Because right now what people feel like, especially with bigger companies, I think what people feel like is that money just goes to investors, that money just goes to the pockets of, you know, higher ups in the company, stuff like that. It doesn't go into the games.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why buy all this loot stuff, regardless of whether they are cosmetic or not, regardless of whether they are random or not, if, you know, it's just throwing money down a well. And then the companies try to make it, you know, they shove them in your face, they try to make them even obligatory, stuff like that, you know, as sort of happened maybe with Star Wars Battlefront 2. And yeah, it's sort of like a communication issue really, and it's an issue of like gaming growing up, so to speak. Like now it's there are entities in gaming that are there just to make money. I mean, they have been for a while, but even more clearly so now.
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean that everybody does that.
Yeah, that's, no. It's a bit of like a side effect, but you know, it's a thing that evolves. And this is a really interesting topic, but our time is kind of up for now.
Yeah, we're trying to make this a bit shorter.
I'm sure we'll return to the topic one way or another later. So
yeah, and for all the three of you watching this, and also hi mom, all the two of you watching this that are not my mom, feel free to leave us comments and like, for example, how do you like this format? Would you like us to do longer ones? Would you like us to do shorter ones? Stuff like that. And
we appreciate all the input.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty much it for this week. That was just some random rambling about Lootcrates, and you know, join us next week on either development stuff or more random rambling about things.
Anyway, see you then.
See ya.